Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Bazinga ball python. You may not have heard of the Bazinga. As a matter of fact, you can actually go over to morphmarket.com and do a search, and you'll find a whole bunch of examples of that combination. But kind of the interesting thing is a lot of people really don't use the common name Bazinga for this combination. So it actually consists of two genes, the Mojave and the Trick. And it's kind of an interesting combination, and in certain cases, you'll have really dark examples of the Mojave and dark examples of the Trick. And some Bazingas can be really dark. I'd say most of them are pretty dark, and you can really enhance them by working other dark genes into the Bazinga to make some really dark, amazing combinations. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you the potential of the Bazinga ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on morphmarket.com, and I want to start with the two genes that make up the Bazinga. And the first one I want to start with is the Mojave. This is what the Mojave looks like. And if you actually look at all the other genes in ball pythons, probably the one that comes the closest in visual appearance to the Mojave, that would be the lesser. Both the lesser and the Mojave are both in the blue leucistic, although the Mojave generally tends to have a darker background in some cases. And I'd say this is probably one of the darkest Mojaves that I've actually seen over here on morphmarket. Look at how dark this is, almost like an inkjet black background. And it's kind of interesting with the Mojaves because a lot of people don't really consider the Mojave to be a dark gene, and pretty much because I've actually seen some Mojaves that aren't really as dark as others. There's some that aren't really that dark, where if you actually mix them into other combinations, you really don't get that really strong darkening effect. Although I have seen, like for example, this really super dark Mojave, if you work this into other combinations, a lot of times you can get a really strong darkening effect from your Mojaves and Mojave combinations, which is pretty awesome. So here is the Trick. The Trick is the other component in the Bazinga, and the Trick it's a really subtle gene. A lot of times it's really hard to pick out the differences between like a normal and a Trick. Sometimes it's hard to pick them out, and sometimes it's really obvious. Like in this case, this is obviously a really good example of the Trick. I've actually seen a lot of combinations where a lot of people will put this as possible Trick. You don't know if Trick's in the combination, and then with other combinations, for example, if you took Trick and worked it into Pinstripe, it has a really strong effect. Probably one of my favorite Trick combinations, working it into Pinstripe to make a really strong effect. Kind of really scrambles up the Pinstripe pattern, which is kind of crazy. So essentially, if you're actually looking, kind of picking out the identification marks for a Trick, what you want to look for is, especially right behind the head, you'll actually see kind of this bubbling of the pattern right along the top of the snake. And sometimes in this, for example, in this case, the bubbling comes all the way down the snake. Sometimes it's kind of unusual. A lot of times you get this kind of a normal striping along the back. Sometimes that'll actually come all the way up to about 2/3 up the snake, and then right behind the neck you'll get kind of this bubbling pattern that indicates that you have Trick in the mix. Another indication that you have Trick is a lot of times it'll really scramble up the alien heads on the side. You can actually see they're kind of stretched out, and then sometimes it kind of blows the tops off the alien heads, kind of really mixes them up, stretches them out, and you get a lot of pixelation. And I've actually seen in a lot of your Tricks and certain Trick versions, you'll actually have a really dark background, which is pretty interesting. So if you actually take a look at this one, this has a really super dark background, pretty much the darkest Trick that I've seen over here on morphmarket. So if you actually take a really dark Trick and work it with a really dark version of the Mojave, you can make some really dark Bazingas, which is pretty amazing. Alright, so take a look at this. This is the Bazinga with a combination of the Mojave and the Trick. And this is the darkest one that I've actually seen over here. I'm thinking this is the dark version of the Mojave and the dark version of the Trick to make a really super dark. Look at the dark head on this one. Almost as dark as a black head. That is super crazy. And you can definitely see both genes in this combination. A lot of times if you're actually looking for Mojave in combinations, you'll notice that it kind of has almost like this floating keyhole pattern all through the snake. That is pretty characteristic of a lot of your Mojave combinations. And then your trick, you can see it really scrambles up all the pattern on the side. It kind of stretches them out a little bit. You can see on this one, it kind of blows the top off and kind of rolls back down. And you can definitely see the really strong bubbling pattern coming in right behind the head. And of course, you can see the really dark background from both genes working together, which is pretty amazing. So I want to show you just a few examples of working some dark genes into the Bazinga. I think that is where it really shines, because if you can get the dark version of the Bazinga and work in some dark genes, you can make some really impressive dark combinations. So the first one I want to show you is the black pastel. And let me tell you, when it comes to the black pastel, pretty much across the board, everyone considers this gene to be a dark gene. You work it into anything and you get a really dark combination. As a matter of fact, the super black pastel is a completely black and patternless snake, pretty much the darkest completely patternless snake that you can actually make as far as the supers go, which is pretty amazing. And keep in mind, the black pastel is also allelic with other genes. It's actually allelic with, you can actually make like a black pastel cinnamon to make the 8-ball, which acts like a super. So if you actually take the 8-ball, read it to something else, you'll get half black pastels and half cinnamons. It's also allelic with Enchi, also allelic with Het Red Axanthic, and it's also allelic with the Lori gene, which is pretty interesting. So you have to keep those in mind if you're breeding black pastel into any of your combinations. So here's what happens if you take black pastel and you work it into the Bazinga. Take a look at this crazy snake. This is a pretty interesting combination. And essentially what this is actually a trick black magic, also known as the black pastel Bazinga, which is, you can, a lot of times you can name them different names for this, for the same combination. So essentially, if you actually look at the name in this one, the black magic is the combination of the Mojave and the black pastel. And as a matter of fact, if you actually take a look at the black magics look almost exactly like this, although in a lot of your black magics, you won't see the extreme pattern disruption on the side of the snake. So you add trick into the mix and it really streaks out the pattern and really scrambles it up. And if you have the right version of the trick, it'll also darken the combination to make it even darker, which is pretty amazing. So here is the blackhead, and the blackhead is another dark gene. As a matter of fact, I consider the blackhead to be the darkest of all the dark genes, which is pretty amazing. Although if you actually make the super blackhead, it does have a lot of pattern compared to like the super black pastel. I say the super black pastel is probably the darkest, completely patternless super form, where the blackhead is probably the darkest single gene as far as just the standalone gene. And if you work blackhead into other combinations, usually you get the darkest darkening effect in your combinations by working in blackhead. So here's what happens if you take blackhead and you work it into a Bazinga. Take a look at this crazy snake. That is pretty amazing. As a matter of fact, I definitely want to get blackhead in my collection. I don't have any dark genes, and if I was to pick just one dark gene out of all of them, it would probably be the blackhead. And look at how dark the head is on this, almost as dark. I'd say it's darker than the darkest version of the Bazinga. And it's pretty interesting how all the patterns are really reduced. You can kind of see the Mojave, you get these little floating patterns, and it seems like the blackhead really reduces it. And you add the trick in there and you really scramble up, you get a lot of pixelation and disruption of a lot of the pattern in the side. And this one's kind of interesting too, because the addition of the blackhead pretty much gets rid of the bubbling behind the neck. So that's not always an indication that you'll have the trick in the comments. Sometimes it takes, you know, kind of like multiple examples as far as like picking out certain traits to figure out what genes you have in the mix. So this one definitely has trick, as you can see a lot of pixelation coming in the side. This one also has yellow belly in the mix, and I've actually seen in a lot of these really dark genes, when you work in yellow belly, sometimes it can bring in more of a lightning effect that you may not want in some of your dark genes. Although if you have yellow belly in there, you can actually work this into like the highways and the freeways, which would be pretty amazing, working these dark genes into a combination like that. All right, so here's another dark gene, and that is the leopard. Pretty much the king of co-dominant genes. Well, actually, the leopard, well, as a matter of fact, a lot of people consider the leopard to be a dominant gene for the longest time, and it seems like just recently a lot of the super leopards are popping up over on morph markets. So it seems like there is a super form for the leopard, and as far as I can tell, it looks like the super leopard looks pretty much exactly like the leopard, which is kind of interesting, kind of moving it from the dominant to the co-dominant. Some people consider the co-dominant to be kind of another name for it is incomplete dominance, which is like another whole topic right there as far as, you know, naming the genetics and getting into it like that. So the leopard's kind of interesting because it's a dark gene that really darkens the background of the snake, and the leopard really jumbles up the pattern. You'll notice it doesn't really have any alien heads on the side of the snake. And if you actually work the leopard into any other combination, I'd say it really works well. It's really obvious and really dramatic in just about any other combination. I consider the leopard to be pretty much the king of combos when it comes to mixing it in with any other gene. It has a really good effect. Here's what happens if you work the leopard into the Bazinga. Take a look at this. This is a really interesting combination. This one is, as a matter of fact, this one also has pastel in the mix. And I've actually noticed with a lot of these dark combinations, when you work pastel into the mix, it seems like it really enhances it as far as giving you a really dark background. Sometimes you'll actually get kind of these highlights on the background, but the pastel will actually really bring out a lot of the brightness on the bright part of the snake and give you a really high contrast between the lights and the darks. I think pastel works really well when you work it in these dark combinations. All right, so here's the last one I wanted to show you, and that is the confusion. As a matter of fact, the confusion is probably the next gene that I want to invest in. If I have a really good year this year breeding snakes and produce a lot of hatchlings, I'll probably use some of my hatchling money to buy a confusion. And essentially what the confusion is, it's kind of like the leopard on steroids. It has a really dark background, almost a little bit darker than the leopard, and it can really jumble up a lot of your patterns even more than you'll actually find in your leopard combinations. And a lot of times with your confusions, if you actually flip the snake over and look at the belly, a lot of times it'll have really strong marks right along the belly, like black marks on the belly. That's an indication that you have a confusion. So here's what happens if you work confusion into the Bazinga. Take a look at this crazy snake. As a matter of fact, this one kind of surprised me because I thought the confusion would really explode the pattern on this one more so than the other ones. And it seems like with the combination of the trick and the Mojave, it seems like it really dominates as far as kind of holding the pattern together on the sides and holding the line right on the top, which is kind of interesting. It almost like competes with the confusion as far as the visual dominance of the genes, which is really interesting. It seems like the more we breed confusion into other genes and other combinations, the more we learn about the confusion, which is, it's kind of a new project that's just really taken off, which is pretty awesome. The other thing I like about this is you actually have, I guess you can kind of consider it to be a triple dark combination. So sometimes your tricks can be dark, sometimes your Mojaves can be dark, and your confusion is definitely dark, and you can see a really super dark background on this one, which is pretty amazing. But let me tell you, you can make some of the most amazing combinations, especially working it in to the Bazinga combinations. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And man, Riss asks, how often do you feed Bobby and how big of rats does he eat? And those are very good questions. So the snake that I have around my neck right here, this is Bobby, my 8-year-old male bamboo ball python. And I pretty much offer him a rat at least every week, maybe every week and a half. And let me tell you, when he was a younger snake, he used to eat a lot. He ate every single week. As a matter of fact, I could feed him like 2 or 3 rodents in a week, and he would eat every single time. And it seems like over the last 2 years, his metabolism has really slowed down where he really doesn't eat a lot. A lot of times he'll eat every single week on a regular schedule, and then sometimes he'll just completely fast and he won't eat for a couple months at a time. As a matter of fact, he just came off of a 2-month fast, didn't eat a single rodent for 2 months straight, which is kind of crazy. And then usually once he comes out of the fast and starts eating again, a lot of times I'll double up on the rats. As a matter of fact, just last week, I gave them 2 rats. And as far as the size of the rats that I feed them, I'd say usually I look at the thickest part of the snake, like right in here, as far as feeding, like kind of sizing up your feeder rats for the snake. And a lot of people say you really don't want to go any bigger than this. And what I'll do is I'll go usually slightly smaller than the thickest part of the snake, probably anywhere from like half as thick to as thick as the thickest part of the snake as far as feeding Bobby here. And sometimes I'll actually feed him some big ones, and sometimes I'll feed him some smaller ones. Just pretty much depends on what I have available at the time. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.